Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. My name is Adrian and today we are doing another My Week in Books. Apologies for the slightly weird lighting. I'm doing this the evening before I normally would, so it's a bit darker about, so sorry about that. But this is what I have been reading in the week that finishes on the 1st of September, or the Wednesday is the 1st of September. So let's jump straight into the things that I had been reading last week that I had not yet finished, and see how we're going with those. So the first of those would be the book 5 in the Emperor series by Con Goldin. This is The Blood of Gods. I did in fact finish this book quite early on in this week and I did enjoy it. It is not the strongest entry in this 5-book series. I think it concluded things well, but not amazingly so. So I would definitely describe this as a good, solid historical fiction, especially if you like Roman culture, if you want to see what's happening in the time of Julius Caesar, a little bit before, a little bit after, in and around there. Very interesting, definitely a fan. Definitely my favourite historical fiction series. It's also one of the very few historical fiction series I have read, so take that with a pinch of salt. In the past I said that a lot of these books in this series are 4-star reads. I think on reflection there's a bit more variety to this than I am giving it credit for. I think book 3 and book 4 are probably the peak of this series. I would give book 4 a 4.5-star rating. I think it was very, very solid. Unfortunately, I think this last one isn't quite as good. It's 4 stars, maybe a 3.5. If I'm being generous, it probably creeps into 4 stars. For me, this has been an incredibly consistent series. There have been no books in this series that I've disliked or thought have been slow or difficult. And actually, the reason I dislike this last one more than some of the others is not anything that I actually think Con Goldin could do anything about, really. In the history that we're following, we end up following different characters because of certain events that happen, and for me they just weren't quite as interesting as some of the characters we had followed previously. Some of the characters I really loved who are still about, we actually got much less time in their point of view, which I think hurt a little bit as well. All in all though, a solid end to a very, very good series. Do keep an eye out for a Should I Read the Emperor series coming on the channel soon. I'm planning to record that today or tomorrow, so that should be up sometime in the next couple of weeks. So do keep an eye out for that if you are somewhat interested in this historical fiction. That is a completed series that I've done, which is great, so that's ticked off my list, hence why it wasn't on my series check-in video that I released earlier this week. As well as that, the other book I had been reading last week was The Shadow of What Was Lost by James Islington. Unfortunately, I've not had loads of time to read this week due to family being around, but I was about 300 pages in when I spoke to you last week. I'm now only about 400 pages in, so still a good chunk of this book to go. But yeah, I am really enjoying this book. It, as I said last week, it is quite tropey, but in a pretty good way, and I have a pretty high tolerance for the use of classic fantasy tropes, and I actually think it's doing it well. And as we're getting further in, it is definitely unfolding a little bit better. I am definitely seeing some differences, some interesting takes on these tropes. I see James Islington taking it into slightly different directions, which I really enjoy. I think he's done very, very well. So definitely a positive on this book so far. I would definitely have this finished for you by the next My Week in Books, he says, hopefully. Yeah, definitely should have it finished by the next My Week in Books next week, and you should get a more rounded set of thoughts. I probably will do a review for it as well. I often like doing reviews for the first book in a series so people can see whether it's something they want to jump into. Just as a brief synopsis, we are following Davian, who is a young man, it's a coming of age story really for him, and we follow him as he is at a magic school essentially with his friends Wur and Asher. Now they are only in this school setting for not very long, so it's not a huge portion of this book. So if you're not a big magic school fan, don't worry too much about that. This is much more a coming of age, going out into the world adventure story than it is a magic school story. In reality, so I'm definitely enjoying that so far. I can definitely see this being a very positive read. And now for the bulk of what I've been reading this week, let's jump onto something that I picked up after I finished the Emperor series, and this is To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini. Now, I know this book came out to a very mixed reception, which I find interesting initially anyway. Christopher Paolini is someone I have not read at all before. I've not read any of his Eragon stuff, so we're definitely into new territory here for me as a reader, as well as for him as an author jumping into science fiction. So far, I am just under halfway through this book, and this book is a chunker. So I'm actually doing on audio, and it's over 32 hours. So it is a chunky book. I think it's about 900 pages, give or take. So yeah, it is not light reading. It is very, very big. I'm, like I said, just under halfway through, and I'm actually really enjoying it. I think it's really interesting. So it's definitely a first contact story. We are following a single point of view, which for a book this massive is quite interesting. We're following Kira, and she's a very interesting character who is really, she wants to be a xenobiologist basically. But there's not actually really any evidence in this universe, or very little, of any other sentient species other than humanity. So that's interesting in and of itself. I also think that it's just a very big universe that Christopher Paolini is trying to write here. It starts feeling standard science fiction, and it started to increase in size and scope and scale pretty drastically, and I actually really appreciate that. As someone who is a fantasy reader mainly, I love world building, and this is universe building. This is really good universe building in my opinion. I think it's written relatively well. It's quite slow paced, but stuff is happening. Like, it's not glacial. It's not like we're getting massive repetitions of the same things over and over and nothing happening. We're not getting a load of navel gazing. There is stuff happening and things are moving, and we are meeting new characters and putting in ourselves in new scenarios, and I think it's done pretty well. There is definitely the odd moment of classic men writing women. If you've ever seen those memes or their subreddit, there is definitely a small section that jumped out to me very much as men writing women in a not very good, not very, yeah, just it seemed very clunky and didn't strike me as a man as the way that Kira would be considering these things as a woman. Now, that could be horrifically wrong. I could be way off here because I am a man. So yeah, but it did feel clunky and a slightly odd way for her to think about certain things, and that is a bit clunky. Now for me, I sort of breezed past that minute of the audiobook and then just, okay, don't worry about that too much, move on, and it's felt fine. Like, generally she's a well-realized character, and I think she makes coherent internal sense. I like her and the conflicts she's dealing with, so I don't think this is like a massive problem, but if you are hypersensitive to those kind of things, it might put you off. It's definitely the odd clunky moment, and I'm spotting it, so if you're hypersensitive to it, there might be a few more of those moments that didn't really register for me, so do be aware of that going in. But if you want a massive scale scope science fiction where we follow one character and one character's point of view, this is interesting, because I don't know there are many of those about, to be honest with you. What I will say as well is, as someone who is listening to this this audiobook, Jennifer Hale, the narrator, is absolutely incredible. You may have known Jennifer Hale from many things. She does a lot of voiceover work in video games. I believe she did the female shepherd in the Mass Effect games. Jennifer Hale does such a good job reading this story. It feels well paced. She's not incredibly slow. She's not overly dramatic. She's not adding too much emotion, especially when it's not needed, but she does give it a little bit of a feel, but while still reading it really cleanly and clearly and very digestibly. So yeah, if you do like audiobooks and you want to get a lot for your Audible credit, there's 32 hours worth of science fiction here, read incredibly well by Jennifer Hale, who I've not seen her doing many audiobooks. Maybe she does a lot more and I've not seen them, but for me personally, it's the first one I've listened to by her, and I think she's just doing an incredibly good job with it. I actually think I might finish this by next week. I might not, because it is a massive book, but I might finish this by next week. If not, it will definitely be the week after. And yeah, I actually really like it. Now, if you look at the ratings on Goodreads, it's down at an average rating of 3.8, which is pretty poor for a big release from a big well-known author. So I'm kind of wondering if it's going to go off the rails soon, but we'll see. We'll see. At the minute, I'm actually quite enjoying it with a few caveats so that I've already discussed. So there you go. They're the 3 things I've been reading this week. Actually, a few less things than often. I've not blasted through any. I've only finished the 1 book, but it has been a good reading week. Unfortunately, the Shadow of What Was Lost has been put on the back burner a little bit, so I'm hoping to get back to that this week and really keep going with it because it is good fun. But that's what I've been reading this week. Picking up next week, I imagine I won't be picking up necessarily many new books because I've got a lot of The Shadow of What Was Lost to read. I've got a lot of To Sleep in a Sea of Stars to read. So I'll probably be back with some conclusions on those and maybe what I've just started afresh if I have finished those just before I check in with you again. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed it, subscribe if you want to see more of my content, and hopefully I'll see you guys again soon.